He yelled at me in the hallway, threatened me in front of my 6-year-old daughter, all because of a misunderstanding. But what he didn't expect was for his own wife to knock on my door, tearfully begging for forgiveness. Life in a condominium isn't always peaceful. Sometimes the biggest conflicts don't come from strangers, but from the people who live next door. And that's exactly what happened to me and my daughter. It all started with a simple detail. Children's noise. My daughter is only 6 years old. She's smart, active, and loves to play in the late afternoon. Like many mothers, I try to balance everything: work, home, and quality time with her. After school, we usually play in the living room, watch cartoons, and hopscotch on the carpet. And yes, she runs. She laughs loudly. She thrives. For the first few months, everything seemed normal. No one ever complained. Until one day, while I was hanging laundry on the balcony, I heard a sharp, aggressive sound coming from upstairs. If that girl doesn't stop jumping, there's going to be problem. I froze. I looked up at apartment 401 and tried to believe he was talking to someone else. But minutes later, he rang the doorbell. I opened the door and found myself face to face with the neighbor from 401, eyes wide, face flushed. He didn't even say good morning. Your daughter is running around inside the house? Do you think that's normal? This isn't a playground. I tried to remain calm. She's just playing, sir. It's 5 p.m. She's not yelling, she's just being a child. He interrupted me with a raised finger. I already warned you once. Next time, you'll see what I can do. The threat was delivered in a direct tone. Cruel. Cold. And the worst part? My daughter was behind me. She heard everything. She gripped my leg tightly. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough to be afraid. Her eyes filled with tears, and right there, my blood boiled. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the urge to retaliate. You're being disrespectful. That's no way to talk to a mother, much less in front of a child. But he wasn't intimidated. He turned and stormed down the hallway, muttering insults. My daughter cried softly. I trembled. Not with fear, but with indignation. That man, an adult, a neighbor, threatened me at my doorstep. And he did it in front of my daughter, who, until then, had never seen anyone treat us with such gratuitous hatred. In the following days, the tension only increased. We'd pass him in the hallway, and he'd turn away. One time, my daughter asked me, Mom, does that man still want to fight with us? That broke my heart. I thought about reporting him. I thought about confronting him. But through it all, I just wanted to protect my daughter. Show her that we can defend ourselves without losing our dignity. Little did I know that the biggest twist was yet to come. And that the person who would surprise me the most wouldn't be him, but his wife. After that scene in the hallway, my daughter was no longer the same as she, who until then had been full of energy, spontaneous, and cheerful, began to play quietly. When she stepped into the living room and saw the rug, she hesitated. She'd sit on the sofa, pull out a notebook, and pretend to draw, even when she wanted to jump. And every time she heard noises in the hallway, she'd ask quietly, Is that the angry guy, Mom? That destroyed me inside. As a mother, you know, there is no greater pain than seeing your child afraid of something you can't control. That man not only offended me, he left a mark on my daughter's mind. A 6-year-old girl who, until then, believed the world was safe, that home was a place of protection, now felt fear inside her own home. I tried to talk to her as gently as possible. Daughter, you didn't do anything wrong. You have every right to play. Mommy is here to protect you. She looked at me with still frightened eyes and said, But what if he screams again? That question haunted me for nights. I began to sleep poorly, waking up in the middle of the night reliving the scene. I wondered, what else could I have done? I tried to justify it to myself by saying he was stressed, that maybe he had problems, that it wasn't personal. But the truth is, nothing justified what he did, because what he did was cowardly. The following week, we went to the concierge to pick up a package. When we got off the elevator, we ran into him in the hall. My daughter held my hand tightly and hid behind me. She was trembling. The man looked at us, pretended not to see, and walked away as if nothing had happened, but the damage was done. At school, the teacher called me in to talk. She said my daughter was more withdrawn, that she seemed distracted and anxious. When I talked to her, the girl said, There are grown-ups who yell at children. And I don't like angry grown-ups. I felt a lump in my throat. The teacher, sympathetic, advised me to talk to her a lot, to reinforce safe spaces, and, if necessary, seek psychological support. I knew I needed to act. Not just for myself, but for her. I considered contacting the building administration, filing a police report, and formally explaining the situation. But before I could take any action, something unexpected happened. It was a Saturday morning. I was making pancakes in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell ring. I opened the door and found myself face to face with the wife of the neighbor from 401. She was pale, her eyes downcast. And before I could even say anything, she blurted out, "Please. Let me speak. I just came to ask for forgiveness." I was shocked. That woman had always been polite but distant. And there she was, in front of me, makeup free, wearing flip-flops, her voice trembling, and her eyes teary. "I heard what happened. And you have every right to be angry. He crossed all the lines. And the worst part, it was in front of your daughter." She came in, sat on the couch, and cried. A silent, tired cry. She said she was ashamed, that she didn't realize the gravity of what he had done until she heard her own daughter asking why her father yelled at people. Yes. They also had a daughter, and that girl, who was a little older than mine, heard her father yelling at a neighbor and was scared. She asked questions. She cried. And her mother felt the weight of what was happening inside her own home. She said, "I can't erase what he did. But I can apologize to you as a woman, as a mother, and tell you that you didn't deserve that. No child deserves to feel afraid where they should feel safe." I held back tears. Because, for the first time since all that, I felt believed. Felt valid. I don't know if it was courage or desperation that brought that woman to my door. But what I saw in her was sincerity. It was repentance. And it was also a pain that went beyond my own. There, in that moment between two mothers, something shifted. The hurt was still there, but it gave way to something new, understanding. The neighbor who yelled, who threatened, was still responsible for his actions. But there, before me, was the woman who lived with that behavior, and who was also, in a way, a victim of it. And that was just the beginning of the turning point, because from that apology onward, things began to truly change. The neighbor's wife's visit was unexpected and transformative. She sat on the couch in my living room, her shoulders hunched and her face weary. I didn't know what to say. I was still processing the scene in the hallway, my daughter's pain, the sleepless nights. But what surprised me about that woman wasn't the apology itself. It was the way she looked at me, like someone who understood my pain because, somehow, she lived within it too. "I wish I had come sooner, but I also needed time to understand what was happening," she said. She told me that when her daughter started acting strangely, scared, restless, asking why her father was yelling at people, she knew something had happened. It was only then that her husband reluctantly confessed that he had argued with me. But he downplayed everything. He said he just asked for silence, that it was a misunderstanding. But children don't lie. Children feel, and it was her own daughter who recounted, in detail, that he had yelled, pointed his finger, and that the girl in the other apartment looked scared. It was her daughter who said Dad was mean to the little girl's mother. Those words, she said, were like a slap in the face. I felt terrible. Because if it were me, if someone yelled at my daughter like that, I don't know what I would do. "And you were strong. Too strong." She said her husband had always had a fiery temper. That she had witnessed his impatient behavior, but she never imagined he would go so far as to threaten a neighbor, and worse, in front of a child. That conversation lasted almost an hour. It was intense. Painful. But, in a way, liberating. She didn't come to justify. She didn't come to defend. She came to acknowledge. She said she didn't know how to fix it, but that she felt the least she could do was come to me and ask for forgiveness. She apologized to my daughter, who, curled up on the couch, listened silently. The woman looked her in the eyes and said, "You are a very brave girl. No one has the right to make you feel afraid. Never again." At that moment, my daughter simply nodded shyly. But at the end of the conversation, she held her hand for a moment. A simple gesture. But for me, it meant more than any words. After his wife left, I closed the door and cried. I cried with the anguish of being disbelieved. With the powerlessness in the face of a man's fury. For my daughter, whose innocence was wounded. But I also cried with relief. Because for the first time since that day, someone had the courage to admit their mistake and truly apologize. The following Monday, another unusual event occurred. The neighbor himself, the man who threatened me, passed me in the hallway and lowered his head. He said nothing. No apology. No attempt to make amends. But that gesture, so small and cowardly, was revealing. He knew I knew. And he knew the truth had overcome his pride. The neighborhood also found out. Little by little, the neighbors began to treat me with more respect. Some even commented, "We heard about the mess. What a situation, huh? I'm glad you calmed down." And then I understood, her apology wasn't just for me. It had a ripple effect. She, without knowing it, gave me back something that had been taken from me that day, dignity, because when a woman has the courage to acknowledge her husband's mistake and speak out with empathy, she breaks a cycle, and that's exactly what she did. After the neighbor's wife apologized, something inside me began to change. It wasn't instantaneous, of course. The fear, anger, and humiliation I felt in that hallway were still there. But the weight I carried was getting lighter. Seeing that woman sitting on my couch, acknowledging her husband's mistake, made me see everything from a different perspective. It wasn't just a disagreement between neighbors anymore. It was about something much bigger, emotional responsibility, because when someone loses control and hurts another, especially in front of a child, you can't simply ignore it. Pretending it was just a stressful moment is easy. What's really hard is doing what she did, facing it, apologizing, and trying to make amends, and it was precisely this attitude of hers that brought a more humane outcome to something that could have turned into war. In the following days, I noticed that things began to settle down quietly. My daughter started playing more lightly again. She still glanced at the door every now and then, still asked, "Is he there?" But now, there was no longer that panic in her eyes. One day, while playing with dolls on the carpet, she said to me, "Mommy," the girl with the sad eyes apologized. "Now her heart is better, right?" At that moment, I knew, my daughter was learning too. She was learning that people can make mistakes, but that sincere apologies have power. She was learning that it's not wrong to stand up for yourself, and that, even in the face of an angry and unfair adult, it's possible to be firm without becoming the same. As for the neighbor, he remained silent. He never apologized, not to me, not to my daughter. He passed us in the elevator with his gaze downcast. But something changed in him too. He stopped yelling. He no longer raged at anyone. His wife, who had previously been inconspicuous in the hallways, began to look her neighbors in the eye. And, little by little, the atmosphere in the building returned to its former self. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted respect, and in the end, I gained something even more valuable, recognition. I received messages from other mothers in the building. Some said they had felt humiliated by similar situations, but never had the courage to fight back. One neighbor told me, "You were strong for yourself, but also for us." That phrase stuck with me, because being a woman and a mother in a world that still tolerates the rudeness of certain men isn't easy. We're judged by how we raise our children, how we dress, how we react. And when we decide to stand up for ourselves, we still run the risk of being called over the top. But that story proved one thing: firmness isn't rudeness. Being firm is protecting what you love without losing your essence, and that's what I took away as a lesson. Today, when I pass that woman in the hallway, we exchange a slight nod, a sign of silent respect. We never spoke about the incident again, and that's okay. Sometimes, what needs to be said has already been said. The rest is silence and time. And when I walk past with my daughter, now lighter, more confident, I look at her and think, she saw her mother face injustice, and not remain silent. She didn't see hatred. She saw courage, and that, to me, is worth more than any fight. If this story touched your heart, like it, subscribe to the channel, and comment here. Have you ever experienced a situation that forced you to take a stand like never before?